good evening, and welcome one last time to this quiet corner of the quiet pantheon. I'm glad you're here for the ending of our story. Make yourself comfortable as you always do. Let your body grow heavy and warm and soft. Let your shoulders sink. Let your hands grow still and open. Let the breath move slowly through you, all on its own. In and gently out. In and slowly out. There is no hurry now. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nothing to carry, nothing to remember. The day is over, and it asks nothing more of you. You do not need to follow every word. Let my voice simply walk beside you, soft and low, as you drift down and down into sleep. Tonight we come to the end of the long life of Thomas Aquinas, the boy from the mountain, the captive who would not be moved, the silent ox whose bellowing came at last to fill the whole world. It is a gentle ending, and a strange one, and in its own quiet way, a beautiful one. Let us walk toward it slowly, together hand in hand, through the soft dark. By now, Thomas was a man in his late 40s. He had spent his whole life in ceaseless, patient work, writing and teaching and reasoning and building, stone by careful stone, his great cathedral of thought. His vast Summa was still unfinished, but it was growing, always growing, reaching higher with every passing month. His days were full to the brim with words, with questions and answers, and the slow, steady scratch of the pen. He had grown heavier with the years, and slower in his step. The long hours bent over his writing had worn at him, the way water wears gently at stone. And yet his mind was as clear and as deep and as patient as it had ever been. Those who came to hear him teach in those final years had said that the great calm river of his thought flowed on, wide and unhurried, just as it always had. No one, watching him work, could have guessed how near the end of the road he truly was. And in these final years, he had returned to Naples, the bright city by the sea, the very place where, as a young man so long ago, he had first met the ideas of Aristotle, and first seen the poor barefoot friars, and first chosen the path that would shape his entire life. The story was circling, quietly, gently, back toward the place where it had all begun, as a long day, at its end, returns at last to the soft light from which it started. And then came a single day that changed everything. A day that all his vast learning could not have foreseen. It was near the very end of the year 1273, early in the month of December. The air growing cool, the days growing short, the light low and golden in the afternoons. And Thomas, as he did every single morning of his life, was celebrating Mass, in the quiet of the church. And during that Mass, on that ordinary winter morning, something happened to him. Something he would never fully describe to anyone. Something deep and overwhelming, and entirely, utterly beyond the reach of words. We do not know, even now, exactly what he experienced in that quiet hour. He kept it almost entirely to himself, locked in the silence of his own heart. But those who were near him saw plainly that he came away from that altar a changed man. Something in him had shifted, the way the light shifts when a cloud passes over the sun. Some who were there said he seemed lost in a deep and tender silence afterward, that he moved through the following days, as a man moves through a half-remembered dream, present and yet somehow also very far away. He did not weep. He did not seem afraid. He seemed, if anything, at peace. as though he had set down some great and heavy burden that he had carried without complaint for a very long time, and had only now discovered how heavy it had been. And from that day forward, Thomas stopped writing, the pen that had never rested in all those long and tireless years, the mind that had poured out millions upon millions of careful words. It all fell silent. He set his great work gently aside, unfinished, with so many pages still left to write. And he would not take it up again. His friend and faithful companion, a man named Reginald, who had walked beside him for years, was deeply troubled by this. He did not understand it. The Summa was so near to complete. There was still so much good work left to do, so many questions still waiting for Thomas's gentle answers. Why had the master suddenly laid down his pen? And so Reginald, gently and then less gently, began to urge him. He pressed him to return to his writing, to finish, at last, the great work he had begun so many years before. And Thomas answered him, quietly, with words that have never since been forgotten, words that have echoed down across 800 years, all the way to this dark and quiet room. He said simply, Reginald, I cannot. Such things have been revealed to me, that all I have written now seems to me as so much straw. As so much straw. Let those soft words rest in the air for a moment. As you lie there in the dark, here was a man who had written more, and written more deeply, than almost anyone who had ever lived. Towering works of reason, a whole cathedral of patient, careful thought, the labour, the treasure of an entire lifetime. And now he looked upon all of it, every page, every argument, and he did not call it wrong. He did not call it false. He did not regret it. He simply said that beside what he had now somehow glimpsed, it all seemed as light, and as dry, and as small as straw. Straw. The thin, dry stalk that is left behind in the field, after the golden grain has all been gathered in. He had seen, it seems, the grain itself, the thing itself. And beside it, even his own greatest work felt to him like the husk, like the dry and empty stalk that once held something living, and now blew light upon the wind. Think of a harvest at the end of summer, all the long months of labour in the field, the planting and the waiting and the tending and the slow ripening under the sun. And then at the very end, the golden grain is gathered and carried home and kept. And the dry straw, which had held it all up toward the light, is left behind in the empty field, light enough for the wind to lift and scatter. Thomas had spent his whole life raising the straw towards the sun. And now, at the end, he had been given, for one moment, the grain. There is something profoundly humbling in this, and at the same time, something strangely, deeply peaceful. The greatest thinker of his entire age, at the very end of his road, gently setting down all of his thinking, not in bitterness, not in despair, but in a kind of quiet awe, as though he had spent his whole long life carefully describing the shore, every grain of sand, every stone, and had finally, for one single overwhelming moment, looked up and seen the sea. He had asked ever since he was a small boy in a mountain monastery one single question: what is God? He had carried it through captivity and study and fame and labour for more than 40 years. And perhaps, on that quiet December morning, at that altar, in some way far beyond all telling, he had been given a glimpse of the answer. An answer too vast and too bright for any book that has ever been written to hold, and so Thomas wrote no more. his great work would remain forever unfinished, and later, gentle hands would gather together his earlier writings to complete the shape of what he had left undone. But the master himself had laid down his pen, for good and for the last time. He had entered at the end a great and gentle quiet, the quiet of a man who has said all that words can say, and has come at last to the edge of something that words cannot reach. Now, in those very same winter months, a summons came for him from far away. The Pope had called for a great council of the Church to be held in the distant northern city of Lyons, and Thomas, as one of the most respected minds in all of Christendom, was asked to attend to lend his wisdom to the gathering. And though he was weary now, deeply weary, and though something in him had already turned, quietly toward the ending, he obeyed. He was a friar. He had taken his vows. And so he set out once more upon the long road, an old and tired and gentle traveller now, so far from the strong young man who had walked these same roads decades before, with all his life still ahead of him. The roads were cold now, in the deep of winter. The hills bare, the trees stripped, the light thin and pale. He travelled slowly, resting often, carried as much as walking. Each mile took from him a little more of the strength that remained, and still he went on, north toward the council. Because he had been asked, and because all his life he had done the quiet, faithful thing that was asked of him, without complaint. But Thomas would never reach the city of Lyons. He would never sit at that great council. For on the long journey, somewhere along the way, he grew ill. There is a story, often told, that as he rode, lost as ever in his own deep thoughts, he struck his head against the low branch of a fallen tree, leaning across the road, and was hurt by it. Whatever the true cause may have been, his strength, already failing, now began to leave him in earnest. He could not go on. He could not finish the long, cold journey to the north. And so he was brought to rest and to recover, if he could, to a quiet monastery that lay along the way, a Cistercian abbey called Fossanova, a peaceful place of grey stone and silence set among the hills, and it was there, within those calm and gentle walls, that the last days of Thomas Aquinas were quietly spent. Picture that abbey in the winter quiet. The grey stone, cold to the touch. The bare cloisters where the monks walked in silence. The thin winter sun, falling pale through the high windows. The slow ringing of the bells, marking out the hours, just as the bells of Monte Cassino had marked them so very long ago, when Thomas was only a small and watchful boy. The story, you see, was circling all the way back. From a quiet monastery to a quiet monastery, from bells to bells, from silence to silence. The monks of Fossanova cared for him tenderly. They knew, of course, what a great man had come, by chance, to rest among them in his weakness. They did all that they could for him, and it is said that, even as he lay there slowly weakening day by day, they came to him with a small and humble request. These quiet country monks, in the presence of the most famous teacher in all of the world, asked him if he would offer them some last words of wisdom, if he would explain to them simply a passage of Scripture. And the dying Thomas, gentle to the very last, did exactly as they asked. He gathered what strength remained in him, and softly, from his sick bed, he gave them his final teaching, his last words on the things he had spent his whole life pondering, given not in a great hall, before a roaring crowd of students, not at the table of a king, but quietly, to a small circle of kind and ordinary monks, gathered close around a humble bed in a country abbey in the failing light. It was, perhaps, exactly the ending he would have chosen. Small, quiet, kind. And near the end, he asked to receive the last rites of his faith, the final comforts of the church he had served all his life. And when the sacred bread was brought before him, this man who had written so very many thousands of careful, brilliant words about its deepest meaning, spoke now, it is said, with the simple, trusting devotion of a small child. All his vast and towering learning had never once made him proud. At the very end, he was as humble and as full of wonder as the little boy who had once tugged at the sleeves of the monks of Monte Cassino and asked them, "What is God?" The circle of his life was closing now, soft and complete. He had begun as a child, in a house of stone and silence, asking the largest of all questions, and he was ending as an old man, in a house of stone and silence, with that same question finally laid to rest in his heart. Everything in between, the captivity, the fame, the towering books, all of it had been the long road that led from the one quiet place to the other. Picture that abbey, in the winter quiet. The grey stone, cold to the touch. The bare cloisters, where the monks walked in silence. The thin winter sun, falling pale through the high windows. The slow ringing of the bells, marking out the hours, just as the bells of Monte Cassino had marked them so very long ago, when Thomas was only a small and watchful boy. The story, you see, was circling all the way back, from a quiet monastery to a quiet monastery, from bells to bells, from silence to silence. The monks of Fossanova cared for him tenderly. They knew, of course, what a great man had come, by chance, to rest among them in his weakness. They did all that they could for him, and it is said that, even as he lay there slowly weakening, day by day, they came to him with a small and humble request. These quiet country monks, in the presence of the most famous teacher in all of the world, asked him if he would offer them some last words of wisdom, if he would explain to them simply a passage of Scripture. And the dying Thomas, gentle to the very last, did exactly as they asked. He gathered what strength remained in him, and softly, from his sickbed, he gave them his final teaching, his last words on the things he had spent his whole life pondering, given not in a great hall, before a roaring crowd of students, not at the table of a king, but quietly, to a small circle of kind and ordinary monks, gathered close around a humble bed in a country abbey in the failing light. It was perhaps exactly the ending he would have chosen. Small, quiet, kind. And near the end, he asked to receive the last rites of his faith, the final comforts of the church he had served all his life. And when the sacred bread was brought before him, this man who had written so very many thousands of careful, brilliant words about its deepest meaning, spoke now, it is said, with the simple, trusting devotion of a small child. All his vast and towering learning had never once made him proud. At the very end, he was as humble and as full of wonder as the little boy who had once tugged at the sleeves of the monks of Monte Cassino and asked them, "What is God?" The circle of his life was closing now, soft and complete. He had begun as a child in a house of stone and silence, asking the largest of all questions, and he was ending as an old man, in a house of stone and silence, with that same question finally laid to rest in his heart. Everything in between, the captivity, the fame, the towering books, all of it had been the long road that led from the one quiet place to the other. The Dumb Ox, just exactly as old Albert had promised so many years before in the cold halls of Cologne. The dumb ox had bellowed so loudly in the end that his great voice filled the whole world. And it is bellowing still, quietly, gently, across 800 long years. Reaching, even now, even tonight, into this still and darkened room, where you lie, drifting softly towards sleep. And so we come, you and I, to the end of our story. Let us hold its whole shape gently, one last time, like a smooth stone in the palm of the hand, as you drift down towards sleep. A quiet boy, in a mountain monastery, looking up at the monks and asking what is God. A young man, giving away wealth and rank and power for empty hands and an endless question. A captive, held a year in his family's tower, who could not be moved. A silent student, mocked by the careless as a dumb ox, who turned out to carry a universe of thought behind his calm and watchful eyes. A patient, gentle mind, building a great cathedral of understanding, weaving reason and faith into one single peaceful whole. And at the very last, an old and tired and gentle soul, laying down his tireless pen in quiet awe, and calling all his life's great work mere straw. Because he had glimpsed, for one shining moment, the grain. There is a deep, deep peace in his ending, the peace of a life that was fully and completely spent. Nothing held back, nothing hoarded. The peace of a single question, carried faithfully, all the way down the long years to its own quiet answer. And the peace of a man who worked with all his might for as long as he was given, and then at the very end simply let it all go, softly, gently, with open, empty hands. The same empty hands he had chosen as a young man on the very first day. And now there is nothing more for you to do either. You have followed the whole long journey now, from the warm castle on its hill, all the way to the quiet abbey in the grey of dawn, the whole of a life, the whole of our story. And there is nothing left for you to carry now, nothing to remember, nothing to finish. Let the candle burn low and lower. Let the great voice fall, at last, gently silent. Let the whole long story dissolve, softly, into the dark, like mist over the morning hills. There is only your breathing now, slow and soft and easy. Only the warmth, only the quiet, only rest. Let each part of the story you have heard, across these quiet nights, settle now, and grow soft and fade. The castle on the hill, the bells on the mountain, the long captive year, the laughing students and the patient teacher, the crowded halls of Paris, the candle and the scribes and the great unfinished book, and the old gentle soul, at the end laying it all down with open hands. Let all of it grow dim and warm and far away. There is nothing there that you need to hold. It will keep safe and quiet until you wish to return. Thank you for spending these quiet hours here, in the quiet Pantheon, among the great and gentle and quiet minds of the past. It has been an honor to keep you company, here in the dark on the way to sleep. And now there is only this. Let yourself sink, soft and warm and safe, down into sleep. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and good night.